The story of Ivar the Boneless begins not with a battle, but with a warning. A Viking seer, a prophetess of the old gods, spoke to the great Ragnar Lothbrok. She foretold that if he conceived a child on a specific, forbidden night, that child would be born under a dark shadow, cursed. But Ragnar, a man who defied kings and gods alike, ignored the prophecy. His defiance would shape history. When the child was finally born, a hush fell over the longhouse. The midwives, their hands trembling, whispered in fear. The infant's legs were soft, twisted and weak, as if they had no bones at all. They called him Ivar the Boneless. It was a name meant to be a mark of shame, a brand of weakness. But when Ragnar looked into his son's eyes, he didn't see weakness. He saw something else, something terrifying of fire, a relentless blaze that even a broken body could not hope to contain. Growing up, Ivar's world was one of pity and mockery. He was the boy who could not stand, the prince who crawled, while other children learned to run, to hunt, to swing an axe. Ivar dragged himself through the dirt and mud of Kattegat. He watched from the ground as his brothers, Bjorn, Up, Sigurd and Hvitserk, grew into fearsome warriors. Every laugh, every look of condescension, every insult hurled his way became fuel for the fire within him. Every moment of physical helplessness became a sharpening stone for his greatest asset, his mind. He quickly learned a fundamental truth. If he could not win with strength, he would win with strategy. If he could not stand tall among men, he would make them all kneel before him. His mind became his weapon, his battlefield, his kingdom. While his brothers trained their bodies, Ivar trained his intellect. He studied tactics, he observed human nature, and he learned to see the world not as it was, but as a chessboard where he could control all the pieces. His mother, Queen Aslog, protected him with the ferocity of a wolf. She saw past the twisted limbs and into the brilliant, burning soul of her son. She whispered stories in his ear tales of Odin, the one-eyed father who sacrificed his eye for wisdom, of Tyr, the god who sacrificed his hand for honor. In these ancient sagas, Ivar didn't just find comfort, he found a reflection of himself. He saw gods who overcame impossible odds, who turned their perceived weaknesses into unimaginable strengths. These stories planted a seed of belief in his heart, a belief that blossomed into a ferocious, all-consuming ambition. He wasn't cursed, he was chosen. As he grew into a young man, the laughter from other warriors didn't stop. When he insisted on joining his brothers on their raids, many scoffed at the idea of a man who had to be carried onto a longship. They saw a liability, a burden. That laughter died in their throats the first time they saw him in action. From his seated position, Ivar could loose an arrow with breathtaking accuracy. He could hurl a spear from the ground with enough force to pierce a shield. But his true terror wasn't in his arms, it was in his eyes, in his voice, in the cold, calculating way he directed the flow of battle. Ivar understood fear on a primal level because he had lived with it. He knew its taste, its smell, its weight, and because he knew it so well, he knew how to wield it as a weapon more devastating than any axe or sword. He could dissect an enemy's mind, find their deepest anxieties, and turn them into gaping wounds. The warriors who once laughed now looked at him with a mixture of awe and terror. They saw not a cripple, but a predator. Then came the news that shattered the Viking world. Ragnar Lothbrok, their king, their father, was dead, captured by King Ella of Northumbria and thrown into a pit of venomous snakes. The grief of Ragnar's sons was immense, but for Ivar, grief was just another name for rage. His father's death ignited the fire within him into an inferno. The time for strategy and patience was over. The time for vengeance had arrived. Ivar the Boneless, the man who could not walk, rose to command. He united the warring clans and chieftains of Scandinavia, forging them into a single, unstoppable force, the great heathen army. It was the largest Viking fleet and army the world had ever seen, a tide of iron and fury poised to crash upon the shores of England. Armies marched, navies sailed, and entire kingdoms trembled, all under the command of a general who was carried onto the battlefield. He didn't need to stand to be a giant. When he arrived in England, he unleashed a new kind of warfare. He was a military genius, his tactics as twisted and brilliant as his own mind. He orchestrated shield walls that moved like serpents, contracting and expanding to break enemy lines. He led his forces through treacherous marshes, using the terrain to create deadly ambushes where disciplined Saxon armies fell into chaos. But his most effective weapon was psychological. He spread terror, using calculated acts of brutality and rumor to shatter enemy morale long before the first sword was ever drawn. Entire villages surrendered at the mere mention of his name. His reputation was a phantom army that marched ahead of his real one. He burned monasteries, sacked cities, and drove kings into exile. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, once proud and defiant, crumbled before him. He carved a path of destruction through Northumbria, Mercia, and East Anglia, turning green fields into graveyards. But all of this was a prelude to his ultimate goal. His final, personal vendetta, King Ella. The man who killed Ragnar Lothbrok would not escape. Ivar hunted him, cornered him, and finally captured him. On the very ground where his father had died, Ivar delivered a verdict written in blood. He performed the most brutal ritual of Viking justice, a horrifying execution known as the Blood Eagle. It was an act of such savage cruelty that it became legend, a story whispered in fear for centuries. Whether this event truly happened as described is debated by historians, but the terror it inspired was undeniably real. It cemented Ivar's reputation as a demon in human form. With his revenge complete, Ivar's ambition did not rest. He established a new Viking kingdom in the heart of England, with its capital at the captured city of York. A disabled Viking prince, now a king, ruling a foreign land through a masterful blend of fear, charisma, and unmatched intelligence. His warriors, utterly devoted to him, would carry him into the heart of battle on a shield, a living throne from which he directed the symphony of slaughter. When he roared his commands, his voice carried over the din of clashing steel, and entire armies moved as one. He was more than a king, he was a god of war. But the same fire that forged his legend also threatened to consume him. Power and cruelty became his addictions. The strategic genius was slowly being eclipsed by a paranoid tyrant. His brutality alienated allies, his arrogance created new enemies, and the loyalty he commanded began to curdle into fear. As his rage grew stronger, his broken body grew weaker. The years of being carried, of dragging himself, of living in constant pain, took their toll. In his final battle, the details of which are lost to the mists of time, Ivar found himself surrounded. His enemies, numerous and vengeance, closed in. But Ivar the Boneless would not die crawling. In his last moments, legend says he did the one thing he had never done before. He rose. Using his spears as crutches, he pulled his useless body upright, screaming a final, defiant war cry like a berserker meeting his fate. He fought, standing on his own defeat for the first and last time, until the final breath left his lungs. His body was buried in English soil, far from his homeland. But his story, his legend twisted, terrifying, and brilliant, could not be contained by a grave. Ivar the Boneless became something more than a man. He became a symbol, a testament to the unconquerable nature of the human will. His life is a brutal, epic poem, proof that true strength is not found in bones or in muscle, but in the mind, in the will, in the relentless fire that refuses to be extinguished.